In the last section, we finished up our tests around our app component. Now, before we move on, there's one little thing that I want to change about our current project. So as you start to look at the top of our app.test file, you'll notice that we're already starting to get these kind of import statements that have all these relative path references on them. So by default, when we're inside of any type of Webpack-based project, or Node project for that matter, we always have to write out relative paths to the files that we're trying to import. So in other words, because our app.test.js file is inside the test directory, if we want to import app, comment box, or comment list, we have to first write out an import that goes up one directory and then attempts to get access to the app file, or comment box, or comment list. As we start implementing more tests inside this project, we're going to end up with some pretty nasty path references, all because of this system of relative imports. So in this section, we're going to do a little bit of tweaking of our React project configuration here, and we're going to make all of our import statements instead use absolute references. So with an absolute reference, we will instead give a path right here that is always absolute to the src directory. So in other words, if we're inside of app.test and we want to get at our app.js file right here, we would write out an import statement that looks into components and then attempts to get at app.js. Now, to be clear, this is not a required step. This is not related to testing at all. This is just a step that's going to make our lives a little bit easier. And this is something that you can use on any React or Create React app project that you work on. So let's do this little tweak to our configuration that's going to make our project instead use absolute imports. So to do this, all we have to do is create a new file inside of our root directory. So I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to name it .env. So no file extension, just .env, nothing else. Then inside of here, I'm going to write out node_path equals src / like so. So that's all we have to do. I'll then save this file, and then we need to restart our test runner, and we also have to restart our server, our development server as well. And after we restart those, we're going to go through our project and update a couple of import statements. So I'm going to go back over to my terminal. I'll find my test suite, and I'm going to restart it. And then I'll do the same with my running development server as well. So that's npm run start for the development server. So while those are starting up, and if you see an error in any of them, that's totally fine. While those are starting up, I'm going to flip back over to my editor, and we're going to update a couple of file references. So we'll first get started inside of our app.test.js file. We've got 3 import statements inside of here that are currently using relative imports. So we're going to refactor all 3 of these to instead use absolute import paths from the src directory. Oh, automatic change over there. So I want to go from the src directory into components and then get each of those 3 files. So I'm going to now do components, app, components, comment box, and components, comment list like so. Now the benefit to this is that I can now move this test file around if I need to, or I can move around those other component files around if I want to, and it's not going to break any of these import statements. Well, it'll break them, but I can much more easily do a global find and replace. Excuse me, that's what I meant to say. We can much more easily do a global find and replace if we start to move around any of these files. Okay, so let's go and fix up our app.js file as well. So inside of here, no longer are we going from the same directory. We're going to instead do components, comment box, and components, comment list. And then the last step will be inside of our index.js file. So inside of here, we no longer need ./components. It will be just components/app. All right, so I've updated all 3 of those files. I should now still be able to go back over to my application inside the browser and see it successfully refresh. So everything looks good over here. And I should also be able to go back over to my running test suite and see all my tests passing as well. So everything looks good over here as well. All right, like I said, this is entirely an optional change. This is not at all tied to testing in any way, shape, or form, but when we start doing testing and we start getting these crazy relative paths, it makes life a lot easier. So let's take a pause right here. We'll come back to the next section and continue working on our test setup.